Накратко, мало интро на македонски. Ви благодарам на сите што дојдовте. Ова ни е втора дискусија на форумот Философија христијана за оваа година. И веќе форматот е полека еволуира до еден облик во кој што канеме луѓе од страна, многу често е на јазик кој што сите го разбираме. Во случајов тоа е англиски. Така што јазикот и на оваа дискусија, како и на утрешната, ќе биде англискиот. И од ова воведна точка префрлам веќе на англиски јазик. So, I want to welcome my dear guests and friends, my dear professors, Dionysios Kliris from the University of Athens, who is my colleague in the direct sense of meaning, and that is that he teaches philosophy on faculty of theology. So this is the most direct link we have together. And our other guest that is familiar to most of you, it is our dear Professor Nенad Markovиќ from the Faculty of Law in Skopje, Professor of Political Science. So, I wish them warm welcome to our discussion. For Professor Markovиќ, it is not the first time, so we won't need special ice-breaking for his presence. But Professor Kliris is for the first time our guest, so I hope that he will enjoy the atmosphere and the discussion and the format we have. So, the general idea of the forum is that we have a discussion, that we have a conversation, a mutual conversation among us, and that we share our thoughts and discuss them. Therefore, it is not a conference type of an event where we have conference papers and then we read those papers, etc., but much more we put the accent on the discussion. We have some 10 minutes input in the beginning from the both guests, where I am the humble moderator and I don't steal their time. I try not to steal their time, but the accent is on the thoughts they share in the beginning, in these inputs, and then we develop a discussion. First, discussion among us, and then a discussion with the audience. Today we have a topic that is a very tricky topic. It is not enough to say it is an interesting topic, but it is really a topic that can be viewed from different perspectives, and a topic that can't be simply answered in one possible framework or one possible way. So therefore we approach this topic from different perspectives. We approach this topic from the perspective of philosophy, from the perspective of theology, from the perspective of journalism, because what I forgot to mention and what I have to mention is that Dionysios Kliris is also a journalist, and he works for one of the biggest newspapers in Greece, that is Tovima. So he has also this experience, also in the context of our topic about the truth, from the perspective of journalism. And when we speak about journalism and media, and then we speak about truth, these are definitely two spheres that all the time, so to say, fight with one another. How to say the truth in journalism, how to share the truth in the same time, and at the same time the journal to be read, to be interesting. How do we have to compromise, to make a compromise between these topics, between these realities we have, the idea that the journal should be read by somebody, or that it should serve an exact ideological framework or idea, and then to say the truth at the same time. The truth is very wide, the topic is very wide. We can begin from the Pontius Pilate, his question, what is truth? And it is not a question which awaits for an answer. It is the answer in itself. It is the cynical answer. It is the answer of the cynical reason over the question of the truth. What is the truth? Like, the truth is not something that can be defined, and it is not something that is actually important when we bring our decisions, when we bring conclusions, etc. That is the mindset of the cynical way of reasoning. And we really experience this cynical notion of truth nowadays quite a lot. When we use the social media, or when we use Google or other browsers in internet, like the criteria through which you will get your results and which you will interact the World Wide Web is not the truth as such, but it is your clicks, your responses. The question is, what are you interested in, what you want to watch, and not simply what is the truth about this or other topic. So we really have a wide field of interpretation and wide field of different spaces within which we can talk about truth. Certainly there is the political space, the political framework, where we can put again the question, what is truth? Or can we speak about truth? Or is there truth when we speak about politics, political reasoning today, realpolitik, etc.? So I just throw all these ideas, all these contexts in which we can speak about truth, just to give a short, small impulse into the discussion. I won't do that for much longer. That's enough from me. I will give the word to our guests. So the first speaker this evening would be Dionysios Kliris. Thank you very much for being with us, and please share your thoughts and your ideas about our topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Milan. It is a very warm atmosphere here in Skopje, and I'm very happy to be with you in this very warm place and beautiful place as well. As you said, I thought we had a discussion when you invited me. So we are colleagues. With this, so we are both into this notion of philosophy inside theology, and also I work as a journalist. So it is true that the subject of truth is one of the most difficult subjects I face. And it is also a subject regarding my integrity. For example, I put to myself the question, when I work as a journalist, when I work as a philosopher, and when I work as a theologian, am I the same person? Am I doing the same job? Or do I have the same notion of truth? Or am I fragmented between very different notions of truth? This question is very important for me. And I will try to share with you the following thoughts, also waiting for the discussion. First of all, at the very first level, we can discern between different kinds of truth, or of truth and reality. In the language, we have the two different notions, reality and truth. Sometimes we speak about reality as the bare facts, whereas when we speak about truth, we might speak about the meaning or the notion of truth also includes a sort of interpretation and a sort of giving meaning to the facts. So the relation between reality and truth is very tricky. For some philosophers it might be the same, for other philosophers it might be even in opposition. Furthermore, I will try to discuss this later on. Furthermore, when we deal with the truth in different works or in different sciences, for example, we have fields or jobs where the truth is very factual. For example, in the law system, when you have to ascertain the reality of an event, when you are a judge, when you're in the legal system, and also when you're a journalist, the first thing you have to do is to ascertain if something happened. So truth there is very much connected to reality. And this is very important, especially when we have crimes, when we have, for example, a murder, a theft. Then it must be very certain that it is very important to ascertain the factuality of an event. So truth is related very much with factuality, and it has a very tangible. This has a very tangible meaning. Someone has committed a murder or not. Someone has also, if we are before a war, we see that we might have a false flag operation, or we must have false data that are used in order to produce a war. There it is very important to ascertain the factuality of an event or of data. And journalism is very much about that. If there is a meaning in journalism, this is one of the meanings. At the same time, also we have the notion of scientific truth, which is ascertaining a normativity, a more general normativity. So this is an explanation. It is not a bare fact. It is a general explanation involving experimentation, involving the truth of one proposition in the sense that this proposition is valid, but it is something that has to do with a general conceptualization in a propositional form which explains factuality. Now, both of these two things do have what one would call the principle of falsifiability, as Karl Popper put it. Whereas, for example, psychoanalysis or theology does not have this principle. In psychoanalysis, you can have many interpretations without a clear principle of falsifiability. This is true also about theology, of course, except if we mean as maybe our principle of falsifiability is the last judgment. Maybe there will be a falsification or a validation of truth, but in this world we don't have a clear principle of falsifiability. So we have some sciences which are called hermeneutic sciences, like psychoanalysis, like theology, in which the truth cannot be falsified in the way it can in the so-called positive sciences. And history is something in between. Historiography is both falsifiable in the sense that one can ascertain or falsify some events through research. The same is true about journalism. But it is also a matter of interpretations. Historiography is also a matter of interpretations. I would like to pose some questions like the following. So basically, firstly, I have spoke about one manner of truth, which is pure factuality, like in journalism and in the law system. Then a scientific form of truth, which is propositional, but it does have some falsifiability. Then we can have the philosophical truth is something more complex because it is a search for meaning. So truth is connected to meaning. We have the truth in hermeneutic sciences, in which the truth is about a correct interpretation, but this does not have strict falsifiability. There is a level of deeper or more surface interpretations. And then we have to do with the theological truth, to which I will turn in the end. Having said that, the question is if all these things is the same truth and in what way. I would like to make some provocative questions. First of all, when we have the mystery of repentance, the mystery of forgiveness, do we turn against factuality? For example, when someone has committed a murder or an adultery or a theft, some of the basic, let's say, sins. When someone is forgiven by the priest or also by the victims of the sins, the crimes, etc., does this turn into is this counterfactual? Does this turn into an annulment of the fact? In this sense, would theology be the opposite of a journalist or of if, for example, a journalist or a judge must ascertain the truth of a crime, the reality of a crime? Is the priest or the theologian the opposite of the judge? Does he, when someone is absolved from a crime, is this against the facts? And if we have the interpretation that the hope that there will be a resurrection of all, would forgiveness be against the facts inside history, so also against the job of ascertaining these facts? Some people say, I forgive, but I do not forget. Some people say, I forgive, thus I forget. And also some people might forget. If one forgets, then this means that he has forgiven. This is a tricky question. And there are also other questions like that. I would just want to make a comment on the history of philosophy and then proceed to theology and to our era. The comment about the history of philosophy, it is what is the difference between the ancient times and modernity? If we put it in one, very semantically in one proposition, in the ancient philosophy, there is, especially in Platonism and Aristotelianism in one sense, there is one identification between truth, being, and beauty. This means, especially in Platonism, this means that when someone is more true, then he's more as a being. And he's also more beautiful in some sense. And this is very basic. But then the question is if the good is higher than truth or truth is higher than the good. For Plato, the good is higher. But for example, for St. Maximus the Confessor, the truth is higher than good. This depends. But the general sense is that truth, being, and beauty are identified, and there is a degree of being more truthful and being more beautiful. What modernity brings is that when we have the modern science, which ascertains facts about this world in a quantitative way through mathematics and through mathematical physics, then you have a great gap between the reality of the science on the one hand and meaning on the other. And Immanuel Kant was the one who had formulated this triple distinction between the reality ascertained by the positive sciences, secondly, a sort of truth which is the ethical truth, the meaning, and thirdly, the artistic truth, which is somehow like a bridge that tries to make a bridge, a union between the world of factuality and the world of meaning, but this bridge is never completed. This triple distinction is very important for the modern man, because we always think as they are the facts that we would not expect from a theologian or from a philosopher to ascertain the facts in our lives. So this is we make a difference between facts and meaning, and also art, and we also make a difference between facts and interpretation. So then, as modern people, we put the question, truth has to do with the facts or with the interpretation of the facts and the meaning of the facts? And what happens if there is one difference between the two? What happens if the facts are in one direction and, let's say, the intentions or the interpretation is in another direction? And then we will turn to postmodernity. Let me turn to theology. I would propose that the mystery of the approach of theology to the problem of truth is our mystery has two poles, crucifixion and resurrection. And these poles are distinct but entangled. And also we believe in the last judgment and in the salvation. Both are important. I would say that crucifixion has to do with the facts, with factuality, and resurrection has to do with the truth. The two are distinct, but they are not divided. There is a union between the two. What I mean is the following, and also our hope is about a resurrection which will happen together with the last judgment. So the last judgment will be the focus of truth. There will be no salvation without truth. But also concerning the factual truth about what happened inside history. But we will not stop to that. There will be a salvation. So we do hope that, for example, someone who was a thief, like the good thief of the gospel, will go to paradise even if his deeds were criminal. What does this mean? The mystery of the Christian salvation has to ascertain the vicious circle of evil. Evil has to do about death and mortality, about the fact that we are mortal. So when we are mortal, we have a focus on, when we identify by our mortality and by our death, we have a tendency to focus on egoism, on our interest, and this also has a relation with the basic sins like glory, how do we say, lust, but also money, etc. These are antidotes against mortality, vain antidotes, but this creates a circle of violence. So when you have to commit a crime in order to ascertain your ego, this will create a circle of violence. The crucifixion was the exit from the circle of violence. As such an exit, the crucifixion did take into account the factuality of death, but also the actuality of sin. The factuality, the crucifixion took into account the factuality of death and sin. Death as mortality as what differs us from God in a natural sense, and sin as a clinging into our own mortality. There cannot be a resurrection in Christianity without the crucifixion, but also vice versa. So what in the crucifixion we have we do ascertain the factuality of this world, but on the other hand, the resurrection is the overcoming of this factuality. So what happens with the Christian is that he or she ascertains the facts just in order to overcome it. The Christian stance is that we have to admit our sins just in order to overcome them. In this sense, someone who is, let's say, truthful in a cynical way someone who has, you are a killer, you're a thief, you're an adulterer, etc., and you are just that, you are just an egoist. From a Christian point of view, this man might be lying because he's not taking into account the eschatological aspect of forgiveness and of overcoming through Christ. And on the other hand, if someone has a very naive sense of salvation of all, etc., then he might also be lying in the sense that there will be no freedom. So there will be no. We need to take into. We must, as theologians, we must not discredit the work of journalists, of judges, or of scientists, because all these people have the duty to ascertain the facts, and we do that as Christians as well, but we do it in the sense of overcoming them. Let's say, where did Christ speak about truth in the Gospels? He said to Pontius Pilate that the truth will, that he bears witness to the truth. So this means that he has come to the world to bear witness to the truth. This means that there is another life of love, which is the divine love of the Trinity, and this is the truth. And this is the truth not only about facts, but it is the truth about an alternative way of being. Then Pontius Pilate asked the famous question about what is the truth, in the sense of someone who is cynical and cannot have an easy access to the truth. The Christ also said that the truth will liberate you. This is a very provocative statement because factuality doesn't liberate us. If the factuality is that we are sinners, and if as cynical we cling to the factuality of sins, this is the opposite of liberation. Then in what sense does the truth liberate us? It is in a double sense. On the one hand, it liberates us. It liberates us. It liberates us because we cannot arrive to the resurrection without admitting the factuality of our sins. On the other hand, this factuality, the truth liberates us only if the truth is an overcoming of factuality, only if truth is something more than factuality. This is love, a way of love and forgiveness. What is very intriguing is that, for example, St. Dionysius, my saint, has said a lie about the identity of the murderer of his brother. So he has, by forgiving the murderer of his brother, he has said a lie to the authorities. So he has said a lie in order to gain a greater truth. Also, it is very interesting that the sense will not say always the truth in the conventional sense. Someone who is a saint will say that he himself or herself is the worst man or woman in the world, whereas all the other are good people, even though he or she is a saint and his interlocutor might be a criminal. How is that truthful? How is it truthful when someone has not committed grave sins to say that I am the bigger sinner, whereas my interlocutor who is a criminal is a saintly figure? This is a provocative theological question. This happens because in the ontological sense, I want to posit the question of love. When we are in love with someone and then we divorce, let's say, retroactively, one can say whatever you have told about me, like your promises, like it was not a lie, so our relation was a lie. If there is a divorce, there is a falsification of the previous love, which is not factual, because factually this love might have existed in the previous years, but we have a sort of retroactive sense of truth. How then are we to... So there is a distinction between factuality and truth, but how are we to make sense of a theological synthesis between factuality and truth? I will end with that. This synthesis is the synthesis of crucifixion and resurrection, or the synthesis of the last judgment and salvation, and only this is the synthesis that liberates us. This synthesis is the following. When we speak about the lie in theology, the devil is the father of lies. We speak about the situation when man is clinging to his or her mortality, so then he must commit sin as a vain antidote to mortality. So the lie is the following. The lie is firstly that some of these antidotes will help you overcome mortality. So the lie has to do with sins like clinging to money, clinging to lust, clinging to glory, clinging to vanity. All these are lies because they don't help you conquer death. On the other hand, some of these are very factual. In some cases, you must be very factual in order to gain money or other things. Some of them also have for example, pleasure, sensual pleasure, has a sort of, it is a lie because it is a sort of means to ascertain some things, and then it is not true ontologically. On the other hand, so there is yes, and on the other hand, what is the truth? Yes, so the lie is clinging to a vain antidote to mortality, but also the lie is the rejection of love. When someone is a cynical, and when he or she rejects love, he's saying a lie, even though what he or she says might be factual. If we say, I don't forgive you, you are a criminal, you have murdered my brother, so I don't forgive you, you're a criminal. Theologically, this is a lie, because this man might repent, this man will be together with you in the afterlife, and it is a lie to cling to his criminal identity. So the devil is saying two lies. On the one hand, he's saying the lie that if you kill someone or if you exploit someone, then you will gain access to life. On the other hand, he says the lie that also if you cling to the fact that the other is a criminal, you will also cling to a lie. And in the opposite sense, we have the crucifixion, which is the rejection of the vicious circle of violence. And after the crucifixion, we have the resurrection, which is the establishment of the eternal truth. In the afterlife, we believe in the resurrection as coming together with the final judgment, which will be an absolute ascertaining of facts, but a fact of facts only in a way to overcome them. If in the resurrection someone gains his view from the factuality, he will say that he will not be able to access the paradise. You can access paradise only if you overcome factuality. At the same time, you cannot overcome factuality if you don't ascertain what happened factually. So we have, but this ascertainment will be in a sense that will not divide us through hate. So I will stop here because I have spoken too much, but my proposition is that factuality and truth, there is a synthesis, there is a synthesis between the final judgment and the salvation, or the crucifixion and the resurrection. I hope in the dialogue afterwards to make some comments about postmodernity and fake news, etc.
Thank you so much. If I understood you correctly, from the perspective of factuality, it was 25 minutes. Yeah. From the perspective of truth, it was 10 minutes. And I don't know if you agree, but I feel it like it was 10 minutes.
if you forgive me.
No, I don't have. Okay, I'm a priest. I can forgive, but it's not something to forgive.
I do admit my sin of overcoming the time limit, which must be ascertained.
What is a sin? Yes.
It is a sin towards the time.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we go to our second speaker, our dear Nенад Марковиќ, please.
Thank you so much. You made a distinction between factuality and truth, and I will try to make a distinction between truth and reality, which are two different things as well. So we are now complicating the debate. Probably I try factually be shorter. We'll see about that. Traditionally, the most dangerous sentence that professors say is, "I'll be short," and then it's 45 minutes. Or I remember a professor of mine doing that actually. So I'll try to fit it in 10 to 15 minutes, if not shorter. So when I was looking about what the original meaning of veritas means, it's not always translated truth or true. It's sometimes translated unconcealed, which means that opposite of the truth is concealment. And lying is not a sin just because you're not telling the truth, but because you're trying to conceal it. You're trying to hide the truth. You're trying to wrap it up in layers of other meanings or lack of meanings or whatever, any kind of discursive action that you might take. So when I was thinking about truth today, and the professor said he'll be talking about postmodernism, it's a little bit like the Schrodinger's cat paradigm. You know the Schrödinger cat's paradigm, it's whether the cat in the box is alive or dead, we don't know. It might be alive and it might be dead. To me, there is a level up to that paradigm, to that trope. There might be a cat, there might not be a cat in the box. You know, so it's concealed. So we don't know what's true. Exactly because it's concealed. When we open the box, then we'll know whether there's a cat and or that there isn't a cat. So until we do that, both realities simultaneously exist. And that's kind of entangled pretty much mentally. In political science, I have never dealt with the truth. We don't deal with the truth. I'm sorry to say that most of the things that I teach to the students, some of them are present here, thank you for coming, people, are not about truth. Because in very often, especially in the realpolitik and daily politics as subcategories of politics, not so much of political science maybe, truth doesn't matter. Perceptions matter. And the perception of truth matters. So basically this is the first distinction I make. Perception of truth for some people is reality. It doesn't have to be factually true. People believe it's true. Many things that we believe, and I find this every day, I re-examine what I know. I always take the Socratian kind of road. Proves me right that we believe things that we consider true, but in fact, from the factual perspective, from the perspective of certain perception, that might not be the case. Or the vice versa, we have perception that they're true, but from the factual standpoint, they're not. There can be many variations of this subject. I won't go into all of them. Perceptions are far more important into politics. If somebody believes that something is true, then it's true for him or her, and it exists as such. I teach at least several categories that are problematic when it comes to Homo Veritatis, when it comes to unconcealment. One of which is, I teach history of political ideas, or political theories as we call it, as we call the course. And there we often deal with historical truths. And when I hear historical truths, especially in this part of the world, I always get the chills a little bit. I always get a little bit scared. Because historical truths are usually, as we all know, written by the winners. And written by one side and are very subjective and are always burdened with some kind of mythopoeia and are burdened with all kinds of layers that might be perceived as truth but are not very factual. So basically, historical truth, when somebody speaks about historical truth, it's much more problematic than when, for instance, theologians speak about truth. I tend to understand theologians more, or professors of theology, when they speak about truth of any kind, than historians. When historians speak about historical truths, then I'm very skeptical, and I always turn a little bit of methodological skepticism in my head so I can take it cum grano salis, as the Latins say it, with a grain of salt, with a big reserve. And I teach an even more problematic subject, which is called political mythology. And you know, myths are sacred stories. They are not rational. They're emotional. You must not attack political myths, especially the national ones and the ones that regard national identity, because they were before time, they were before, they are sometimes even ex nihilo. And reason here, they're literally sometimes ex nihilo, they come from nowhere. And sometimes reason has to be turned off when you speak about political myths because they're purely affective categories. And when I tell the students stories about historical figures, for instance, to connect it to the first point, that were not nice persons, they're very surprised. For instance, in my case, let me tell you how political myths and truth worked. Tito was good, Tito was very bad, Tito was the worst, and then Tito was again very good. Because we haven't seen better. So basically I had 4 different standpoints and I was very confused. Pinky saw Tito when I was, I don't know, 3rd grade, or Tito and the occupation of Drvar and the attack on Drvar, basically the invasion of Drvar. And then he was a great person, very brave, and his dog rescued him. His dog had an extraordinary IQ, obviously. And then Tito was the reason why the old country fell apart. My father would usually say my father is Serbian, as you can conclude from my name. Tito was the biggest villain that did the worst things to the Serbs, so Tito immediately became a very bad figure. And after 20 years, my father changed the discourse and said he was probably the best because we haven't seen better. All these politicians from Tito onward were really... So what is the truth there? What is the perceived truth and what is the factual truth? Nobody really likes to speak about the factual truth. In fact, everybody speaks about this subjective perception of truth. But political myths are usually, as Christopher Flatz says, one of the biggest, and that is implied in other books as well on political mythology by other relevant authors. Myths are not true, but they're real. If you believe that these people on the walls were our ancestors and did something very important for this nation, for you that's real. It might not be true. Garibaldi was a horrible person. He was a thief, he was a thug, he was not nice. But he was the biggest, he was a thug, but you know, thugs make nations. Intellectuals just help. Because he went to the south of Italy and convinced everybody, you are all Italian, even the Sardi.
Intellectuals help or make problems?
Or make problems, depends, yeah. But thugs make nations. You know, thugs make nations. People that are vile sometimes. I used to tell my students the example of the famous komitaji Jordan Piperkat, the famous. There was a documentary on him, and there was an old lady. They said all the possible worst things, that he was a thief and a womanizer. And people praise him as, I don't know, as some kind of historical figure. And he said he was here for the food and the women, and then he left. He sometimes met the Turks, sometimes he didn't, you know. But he would usually, he had a girlfriend here in the village. He would usually, well, she used another word, I will say, he used to make love to her and then go home. So basically his interests were somewhere else aside from the national struggle for national independence. But it is a mythicized political figure. People see him as the reality for him is that he was a very brave komitaji, very brave anti-Ottoman fighter, right? We don't know what really the truth is there. That old lady seemed to know more than us, obviously. And then we teach, I don't teach it, a colleague of mine teaches it, public perceptions, which is also a problematic category that doesn't deal with truth. You know, I always say that standpoints that pretty much define what the truth for you is are made of cognitive, affective, moral, and contextual components, you know, and the affective components overshadow very often the cognitive components, and that's what really in public perceptions forms the truth. So the truth is whatever you convince people is the truth. In politics, at least, in daily politics. Political science tries to kind of shy away from that or redefine it or approach that in another manner, but very often it fails. In political science, there is also a procedure which is rarely seen in other sciences, where you can achieve truth through a procedure. And it's called public deliberation. Public deliberation is about achieving truth of some kind. Maybe deliberative theorists or deliberative Democrats would be very mad for me defining this in a very loose way, but there are at least 7 criteria a discussion to be called deliberation. The problem of deliberation in the public space is that it's not deliberation. It's just discussion. Why? Because deliberation is a structured conversation that needs criteria in order to be called deliberation. This today is deliberation, for instance. Because you need equality, so all the sides to be equal, like all here in the room, we are all equal, everybody can say whatever you want. You need to justify your standpoint, so you need the justification rationality. We are all here for a certain common good, you need a common good orientation. That excludes the act of being selfish, for instance. We need respect and agreement. We respect each other. We hear each other out. We give ourselves time. We write down what we say, then we reply or we ask, etc., etc. We interact, which is the 5th criterion of interactivity. We are constructive. We're trying to do this to get somewhere, to do something constructive. And we are truthful, or at least we are trying to be sincere or truthful with interpretation of facts. In politics, it's very hard, because interpretation is pretty much everything, but the 7th criteria of deliberation is sincerity and truthfulness, and it's very hard to evaluate. I know I wrote a text for the London School of Economy and Political Science about truthfulness in the case, or deliberation in the case of the so-called French proposal between Macedonia and Bulgaria, and it was very hard to write it, because the sequence of events was very unclear how things went. And it was very problematic what happened. But it was all anti-deliberation mostly. Speaking about this postmodern times, or as some people would say, the post-information society. The first thing that blurs the whole idea about truth versus reality is a category that was very popular, and it still is, and I think that both Trump and Zohran Mamdani kind of proved that it's still very actual, but from 2 different sides, and that's identity politics, for instance. In identity politics, the whole debate between the left and the right, not just in the United States, but in here, everywhere in the world, more or less, is about truth versus reality. Biology is true. There is an X and an epsilon chromosome, and that defines whether you're a man or a woman. But that might not be a reality for somebody. And that's a question for psychologists, in fact. It's not for political science, it's not for theologians strictly, it's maybe even for psychology. Because for somebody, that combination of X or X and epsilon might be true. It is true, it's factually true, but might not be real. So the left, or the identity left, not the economic left so much, would say it's about what's real for the person, not what's true. And the conservative right would say it's about what's true for the person, not what's real. And then you have a huge clash between true and real. Just like in political myths, they're real, sometimes, very often, they're not true or not completely true. And in here, it's a very direct clash between real versus true. So it depends on what you want to believe. But it also blurs, for my taste, it pretty much blurs the access to truth, because this endless particularization of identity on many bases, not just sexuality, not just gender, not just, I don't know, men versus women, not just biological categories, is very hard to catch up. It's very hard to understand, to grasp. People cannot evolve with that speed to grasp the whole debate, because the debate is also very, I would say, exclusive. It excludes people that cannot follow it, and they are instantly cancelled, which is very bad. And it's cancelled on both sides of the ideological divide. On the right, it's cancelled on the occasion of the national identity, traitors versus patriots, a debate in every given society in the world, the Balkans especially. And on the left, it mostly regards sexual identity, where cancel culture is the image of the enemy that doesn't understand what we're saying. I don't know who the hell told anybody that somebody has the obligation to understand. You know, so toleration is fine, but nobody has the obligation to understand anything. It's not implied, it's not explicit. it's a choice at the end of the day for everybody. Then we have the concept of post-truth, which is very dangerous, or alternative facts. I was a member, somebody reminded me before the debate that I was a member of the Security Council for 5 years of the country. I didn't really need that experience. I need it as much as I need a pancreas tumor, basically. So, but I went through it because I love new experiences. I regretted it occasionally, not from the obvious reasons that you might think, but because I found out that I was in touch with sensitive information all the time, classified information, and you see that in those documents you find, not those documents are not falsified, but you can see reports on how these mechanisms of falsifying work. And it's very easy. It's very easy. They are all around us. Malinformation, disinformation, misplaced information, deliberately given wrong information so people get confused, etc., etc., which brings me to the next point, which is methodological. I met a student last night. This was a great example, although it's a very dark example. It's not a fun example. On the contrary, it's a very depressing example. And he defended an MTZ. I was his mentor, and I said, "Say hello to your father." And he said, "Oh, my father died." And I said, "Sorry, I didn't know this. He died in January, and he died of cancer because of the vaccines." And I stopped there and I said, "Okay, this has to do something which is called, and it's very often misplaced and kind of, it's concealed, if I can say, or it's ignored, internal validity." People usually don't know what internal validity means in science. And it's very important, even if you're a lay person, even if you're if you're not into science. Because people tend to correlate things very easily. Because the rates something. I, as a scientist, can never exclude that X causes epsilon. But I, as a scientist, want to know whether this X determines it 1%, 5%, 10%, 20%, 50%, 100%. Whether there is an alpha, omega, beta, theta, or another set of factors that also bring to a certain outcome. Because people tend to simply correlate vaccines, cancer, my father died. And it's a sad event. I knew the father, he was a great, very jolly, very festive person. But people tend to disable their own access to truth by reverting to this kind of very mentally lazy patterns of thinking. I always say, not just to the students, but to the general public as well, I sometimes have the impression that we are a nation that shies away from complex thinking, complex model of thinking, because it's hard. We want simple correlations. X brings to epsilon, period. Why? Because there is something in political science called avoiding uncertainty. People don't want uncertainty. People want to say X causes epsilon. End of story. For him, it's comforting. The vaccines killed it, somebody else is to be blamed. There is an external factor that did this and killed the doctors. And basically, down with the pharmaceutical mafia. It might spur all kinds of activism. But nobody is interested, okay, what's the exact mechanisms through which this occurs? How do vaccines open this Pandora's box of, I don't know, malign infestations in the body, for instance? Nobody wants to explain that. Until somebody explains that to me, I'm not taking anything verbatim. Because in social sciences, we don't deal with causalities, we deal with correlations. Sorry. I don't come from the background of natural sciences, where the moment you stop breathing, you die. It's much more complex in social sciences. I need percentages, I need influences, I need internal validity. People don't think in terms of internal validity, and they self-abstract their access to the truth, or at least an attempt at truth. And at the end, there was a phenomenal question yesterday I came across what's that called? Doom scrolling, is it called? It's called doom scrolling, right? Doom scrolling, when you just scroll in the bed and you're too lazy to do anything else. laziness is a sin. Basically, doom scrolling doubles the sin, I guess. So I figured somebody said AI will be so improved in the near future that at some point we'll have zero idea what's true. And especially you can falsify historical events. It's not that we were not good at it as it is. We are great at it without AI, at falsifying basically historical events and or presenting them through a lens that might seem real, but it's not in fact true. Like the case of Jordan Piperkata, for instance. What was his real character and behavior and how much he had contributed to the national fight of the local populace. But honestly, what if the new generations that are formatted to 45 seconds of attention, to digital and visual obtainment of information, obtaining of information, how will they understand history if AI can generate it from any given story? Well, there is a way. I think that we'll all revert back to books. We'll probably have to if we want to get serious. Books that were researched and books that were hard to write, not that AI writes, before we become, I don't know, Homo ChatGPTs or Homo Groks or Homo Gemini or what I called generically Homo Post Veritatis. And this would be very dangerous. That's the way that we are going. And forgive me for being honest, but I'm very, very afraid. Thank you.
Thank to the both. I thank you both. Like this was so multi-layered input that I really ask myself: should I ask any question, or should I just directly throw the ball to the audience, or do you have to refer to one another maybe first?
I would like to ask a question.
Yes, please. Let's start this way.
When you distinguish between reality and truth, how would you define reality and how would you define truth as distinct notions?
I define it mostly from the political mythology perspective. For instance, truth would be whether something factually, what you call factuality, whether something factually happened. Many things that people believe to be truth, and that's real for people. That's how Christopher Flood puts it, the biggest researcher of political myth, one of the biggest. He says political myths are sacred stories that give us a notion of, I don't know, chronotopic existence, of chronotopic placement. Where we are, who was there before us, where are we going, physical geography, faith, collective faith and whatnot. And people believe that they're real. But from the perspective of what factually happened, sometimes things that we believe happened didn't really happen. For instance, the case of Goce Delchev. You know, I very much like the example of Goce Delchev. When we have a fight with the Bulgarians, usually about his ethnic background, I tend to ask them, okay, but what about his religious beliefs? How can he be Bulgarian/Macedonian and not be Orthodox? And he wasn't, as you know. And nobody wants to discuss this. Bulgarians are usually confused. How? Who? Checkmate. The League of Kukush was formed under the influence of the Pope. They were waiting weapons from the Vatican to start a rebellion in what is today northern Greece, basically, in Kilkis. They were waiting for guns and whatever from the Vatican. And that's how their religious orientation changed. And then usually the Bulgarian counterparts, professors, usually are very confused because it's not something that people discuss. So truth is one thing, reality is another thing. What factually happened, what was his religion factually, what he believed in, or his father more precisely, is the factual part, the reality part. Truth is something else. Sorry, that's the truth. Reality is something else. People believe that something else is real. They have this romanticized imaginarium of a person. How they looked, Venizelos is one of the most mythologized person in Greek history, for instance. Venizelos, yes. The great uniter and one of the fathers of the Greek national project, etc., the old Venizelos. So, what was factual is completely different.
So you define reality as the existential experience, as the experience, as the
Yes.
subjective experience.
Yes. I might be misguided by Christopher Flood's understanding, because it's a very suggestive sentence that he uses. Political myths might not be truth, but they're real. You know, that's what he says. So it's kind of a play with words, mostly it's kind of a play with categories. It's a game of categories.
You know what I find interesting? I want just to connect the two, your both expositions. You made the difference between the mythological, political mythology, yes, and then the truth, the facts, yes, and you made a distinction between the factuality and the truth behind factuality, and in the context of religion and context of religious mythology, in the religious myth, what is more important is the mythological truth, the narrative which is behind the factuality, and it is perceived as more truthful than the very factuality as such. When you read, for example, the life of the saints, the Vita Sancti, you have a lot of technically impossible things that many of the things that are told are technically impossible to be as such. So the factuality is very questionable when we speak about Vita Sancti. But the idea is that this narrative shows the truth about one or another topic. And it can be ethical truth, it can be ontological, religious truth. So when we take this idea from the realm of the religious way of perceiving truth, and we try to use this concept in the realm of the political, the social, etc., then we see that we cannot do the same thing. You know, we have a multiplicity of interpretations, like this political, mythological interpretation. They can be ideological interpretations, ideological perceptions of truth, which take some narrative and they overstate this narrative. For example, the idea of freedom. And then you overstate the idea of freedom, and then you start interpreting everything, no matter if it is factual or not, and say, but it is the freedom that counts. It is not important if this is good or bad. It's unimportant if it is truthful or not truthful. The freedom of choice, etc., makes it truthful. And on the other side, the narrative of being traditional, of being conservative, etc., the very fact that it belongs to our traditional values, whatever we understand under traditional values. If we try to research them a bit more, we will see they are not more traditional than 100 years, 150 years. What we perceive as traditional is very often quite young. But still, you have the narrative of tradition, and then you subordinate every factuality and every interpretation under this overstated notion of tradition or freedom or whatever else. So, how this functions within religion, and how this cannot, or whether it can function in ideology or politics. It looks like the same pattern.
Which pattern exactly?
The mythological truth,
the mythological truth,
or the very truth behind and above the factuality. In religion functions as the truth, but in ideology or in politics or in sociology, etc., it actually hides the factual truth. as much as I understood your two inputs.
Yes.
How do we compare this? Because you have the same idea, yes? But it functions in religion, but it doesn't function here. Is it so?
I wanted to refer to that. First of all, I would like to say terminologically, we define the notions in a different way, even though we might agree in the depth. So, if I understood you right, you define truth as the facts and reality as the subjective experience. Yes. And I do agree with that. My definitions are factuality, reality, truth. In my exposition, factuality, I meant the facts, the events. I would define reality as, let's say, a system of events. According to Lacanian psychoanalysis, reality is symbolic. I mean, reality is the narration about the events. This narration might be real or not. It might be a false narration, a fabricated narration, but even the true narration, it will be a narration, it will be a systematization, it will be bare facts. And then truth, I use truth in the sense of meaning, philosophical meaning. I also use it in the theological sense. In the theological sense, I would define that truth is identical with love. For a Christian, the truth is God. God is love, and truth is identical with love. So the lie, whatever is a lie, is that what the devil tries to do, let's say, is to convince people that love is not real. But I would not like to divide truth, the theological sense of truth, from other senses, because my effort was to say that even a Christian should take into account reality and factuality. Love should not be a hippie style love of I don't care, or a postmodern. This first as a terminological comment. To answer your I would say the following: we have the artistic truth. For example, the Brother Karamazov, or Anna Karenina, or Hamlet. Or to use Aristotle's example, Oedipus, tyrant. Is it true or a lie? Is it true or false? From the factual point of view, this might not have happened. But for an artist is trying to be truthful if he's Catholic, if he tries to express a universal experience. So the artistic truth is the universality, and sometimes, for example, someone who writes a historical biography, he will be judged, if the emphasis is on the history, he will be judged on the criterion whether he's ascertaining the facts or not. If someone is a historian, he writes a biography as a historian, he will be judged on the factuality of the facts. If he writes, yes,
very good point. Sorry.
If he or she writes a historic novel, he will be judged on how he expresses the universality of the situation. So in this sense, the main philosophical question is whether imagination is true or false. We have the lies, but we also have imagination. We have artistic imagination. Is artistic imagination just a lie, or is it something other than a lie? The answer to, for example, when Dostoevsky writes a novel, is he simply lying, or he's trying to decipher a truth? The answer to that might be that if, and this is the answer of Aristotle to Plato and also to Plotinus afterwards, the Aristotelians or the Plotinians, the answer would be that if the artist is trying to deliver something universal, then he's trying through art to produce a more universal truth, even if he does not have the right contents right, the right facts right. And so we are not just, this means that men are not just facts. When we do art, when we do novels, we are more than facts. The following question is when we are trying to have a national myth. For example, Benedict Anderson was saying that nations are imagined communities. So is this just a lie? Could this be a universal truth? This is a very tricky subject, because the fabrication of a nation or the formation of a nation, it might be a lie if it's a pure fabrication. It might be a deliverance of an artistic truth if those who make this imagined community are like novelists, are like artists, if they imagine something that's universal. But it is true that from the point of view of universality, the nation cannot be totally universal, because nations are focused on division between them. This would be, let's say, my answer. But the fact that we as humans are not satisfied, the fact that we as humans are giving so much importance to novels, to art, even to nations are imagined communities, this means that we have imagination as something different than factuality. This means that truth is not just factuality. In theology, we have the very important parable of Adam's fall. Many theologians try to ascertain, was the story of Adam and Eve really true? Is it a parable about human existence? Yes. So the fact that we are not content with factuality, we give importance to imagination and to art. This means that there is a higher notion of truth. I would, as a Christian, I would point to that as love. Why? Because love is the utmost universality. When we love, we are truly universal. When we are egoists, we are like nations who fight against each other. We are like, when we are using imagination for egoistic reasons, we are like imagined communities who use myths in order to have war. I'm sorry again for speaking too much.
Thank you so much. Do you have to respond?
Yeah, just because you ask how it functions in politics. Well, I always tend to point to a very controversial author, which is called Carl Schmitt, which was never denazified, unfortunately, and it's forbidden, for instance, to mention. No, it's not forbidden, but it's highly not recommended to mention him if you're in Germany, for instance. But in this part of the world, it's probably okay to speak about Carl Schmitt and his most famous books, Political Theology. My professors used to tell me that it's a very important book, because the point of the book is that all political concepts were at one point theological concepts, and politics is secularized theology. That's what Carl Schmitt says. And that's why many mechanisms of, although we might define it in different categories, are very similar. I'll tell you a personal experience because I loved the concept where you said that reality is shaped by narratives, in fact. The Ministry of Exterior a few years ago offered me a position to be in the secretariat of the joint committee between North Macedonia and Bulgaria that deals with school books. It was a consequence of the so-called French proposal and the bilateral dispute we have. And my experience, my conclusion there regarding truthfulness, reality, factuality, and all the categories that we mentioned, that it will never work. It cannot work. Exactly because of the distinction that we made. Factuality is not being... the clash between the two sides is not about factuality. The clash between the two sides in the committee, as a result of this bilateral dispute that we have, and the committee that was made through the good neighborly agreement and whatnot, is in fact about narratives. And I will just tell you how it functions in politics when there are two opposing narratives. If we interpret that the Bulgarian side during the Second World War on the territory of what is today the Republic of North Macedonia was just administration, you absolve them of the sin of deporting the Jews. It was just a command, and it might have not even existed. It's borderline Schrödinger's cat's debate in Bulgaria, for instance, between two groups of historians that completely disagree on the issue. Some say that it never happened, it's a truly Schrödinger's cat. And the others said that Bulgarian society should probably face it. But you absolve it and you say, okay, so, or at least it makes the population, the Macedonians in North Macedonia today, it makes the population complicit at least, or equally, you can equally blame it because it was part of this Bulgarian state or Bulgarian ethnicity. Our narrative on the other side, that they were invaders, so to say, occupiers, absolves us from our part of the guilt, whether the Jews were deported. And we say, there is another army that did it, these are foreign people that came to occupy this land, and there is the wagon in the Museum of the Holocaust that is a factual evidence of what happened, right? And then we make a distinction between two groups, and one of these groups is to be blamed, and the other one is not to be blamed for the deportation of the Jews. So basically it's about clash of narratives. It has nothing to do with the factual situation. The factual situation is that these people were deported to Treblinka. Most of them, over 90-something%, died there. And that North Macedonia, what is today the Republic of North Macedonia, were in the top 3 or 4 countries in percentage of Jewish population that was exterminated, killed, lost, whatever definition you might want to use. So this kind of historical committees, there is a reason why the German-French committee works for 50 years and has not had much success. Because it's usually this type of committees are not trying to oppose factuality, historical facts. They're trying to oppose narratives. And that's exactly what was happening in the committee between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. People were clashing narratives. They were two opposing narratives of what certain phenomena, occurrences, historical figures, dates, events were. And this is where that's the point when it really gets messy. I was in the secretariat with 3 or 4 other persons for 1 year. We had several meetings in the Ministry of Exterior, and the closer you get to 19th century, the things get more complicated. Because you abandon the concept of the millet system, you come to the devlet system, the falling apart of the Ottoman Empire, formation of states, anything from 1830 onwards is kind of problematic. And it pretty much functions like that. So basically we have clash of realities in the committee, supported by family stories on both sides. For instance, one of the most important points here is that I think it's a metro station in Sofia, is called Bežancite. And it's mostly about people that fled from what is today the Republic of North Macedonia to Bulgaria for political reasons. And nobody speaks about that here, for instance. Why they fled? Why is there a metro station called Bežancite? Or the refugees, right? As much as Bulgarian society doesn't want to speak about the deportation of the Jews, or at least not all of the historians, which brings me to the point that history is a very problematic science. There is a clash of two concepts of history in the Balkans: deconstructive and constructivistic. I belong to the unpopular traitor part of deconstructivistic history, and I support that part of history. Nobody likes that, because people don't care about factual. They want to be right. And this is what constructivistic history gives you. It shapes facts, it shapes the narratives, so at the end, you be right. It gives you psychological satisfaction. It doesn't give you factual truth. It gives you some kind of narrative and reality which you can live with and sleep with ease at night, you know? And this is what all countries in Southeast Europe do. It's a very worrying trend, but it has always been there. It will remain there, I think.
You mentioned a very interesting philosophical point. In order to reach the truth, maybe you need to use deconstruction of the narratives in order to reach it. So,
Yes.
You know, there is a narrative that postmodernism and the method of deconstruction, etc., tries to relativize the truth. But what you said is actually searching the truth.
It's the opposite, in
Quest
fact.
for the truth, the method of
It's the opposite.
deconstruction, looking for truth. So it was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
The time is flying, and we have not more than 15 minutes. It is maximum 15 minutes for short questions from the audience. So the podium is yours if you have questions or comments, but they will be limited on 30 seconds. So no long comments, not long questions, very short and concise. So please.
A narrative, and because of this, my question is: can you actually, in history, in historiography, distinguish between the absolute truth, factuality, and a narrative without creating a narrative yourself? Is there any other way to reach the absolute truth, factuality, without a narrative? Can you actually evade narratives altogether?
Okay. I think it's very hard to believe secondary data when it comes to history, and it's mostly secondary data. Anything that you haven't witnessed or has not happened in your time, it's very hard to define, very hard to describe, and very hard to know exactly. So history in itself is a very problematic science when it comes to truth versus reality or factuality versus narratives, etc., etc. And it's one of the methodological aporias that probably cannot be avoided. Because any type of deconstruction is also a narrative in itself. It's also a narrative in itself. But you can utilize what is known in science in general, not just in political science, methodological limitations. Stating the limitations that you have when you interpret something. And it has something to do with humbleness, a little bit with academic humbleness. Because you say, listen, I'm interpreting from a specific standpoint, and that specific standpoint has limitations of context, of time, of place, of occurrence, of certain factors that might be deus ex machina, etc., etc. So please take this cum grano salit. It's called methodological skepticism. It always has to exist. People have forgotten about these categories that enable us to reach certain let's say, certain level of factuality, because it can never be 100%, that might convince us in existence of certain truths, as relative as they might be. So basically, that's the best you can do. The problem is, the problem with science is not lack of self-confidence. It's sometimes too much self-confidence. And forgetting that, especially in social sciences, history included, and especially history, you have to be very skeptical and very reserved when you give certain statements. Especially because there is one danger that very often, I was explaining this today in the political theory class, because of what is known as presentism. And this is very dangerous, very vivid debate in the West, especially in the US, on presentism. Historians tend to get into a pitfall very often, which has everything to do with factuality and reality, all the categories that we mentioned, and that is interpreting things from 3, 4, 5, 10 centuries ago with the instrumentarium or the methodology that is today present. Looking at past events, at historical events, from the present perspective might be very wrong and very dangerous. We tend to speak about the Serbian narrative has this, the Bulgarian narrative has this, the Croatian narrative has this, speaking about defined Serbian or Croatian or Albanian or whatnot nation in the 12th century. And people take it verbatim, it's real to them. When the concept of nation was very, very far from being real, truth, factual, whatever you want to call it. So basically the best you can do is be sober when you speak about historical things, and be very reserved. Trying to achieve 100% certainty or factuality might lead you to hell, basically. Don't try to do that, because you can never do that. Not in social sciences, not in history. Try to get as close to the truth as possible, with all the reserves and all the baggage, methodological baggage that each method that tries to achieve this has. That's basically my recommendation.
I think that because of lack of time, it's better to hear more questions.
Okay, we have another question here.
Thank you. This question is directed to anyone who wants to answer. My question is the reason that these distinctions between truth, reality, and so on even exist, that the mechanism of human perception is such that it maps something which is objective reality, as we talk about it, to some symbols which we use in our communication, and this process is identical whether that source is objective reality or in some other interpretation of it, and so on. So basically, is the process of perception the same whether we are perceiving from ground truth or from somebody else's interpretation, maybe? And if so, is that the reason that we can't just unify these perceptions into one sort of view?
Universal perception.
Yes, individual still, maybe. I'm talking about universal in the sense that we think that this is true and this is not true, but with no doubt within ourselves because of different facts that we perceive. Thank you. Sorry if I worded it badly.
I would like to say about that, I agree with you, and when I make this semantic distinction, factuality, reality, and truth, it is if we are to examine that, it is difficult to make an absolute distinction. I mean, as you said, we have a fragmented point of view, so it is difficult to have a complete truth about any fact. So reality is always symbolical, and sometimes it is also already imaginary because we use imagination to cover gaps as humans. Then the question is if this imagination is just a universalizing factor or is it a lie? It is a question. So I think that if we are to dig deeper, we cannot find pure factuality. Every factuality is already a reality that is constructed through symbols and through also imagination, through the language, etc. But factuality does exist as a resistance to symbolism and to interpretation. So I would term factuality as a resistance that cannot be denied. For example, if someone, for example, if you have the fall of Constantinople, some people say something which might be false or true, that someone has opened one gate, the Kerkoporta, and the Turks went inside. One level is to identify the fact. Did this happen or no? But of course, this fact is minimal. Constantinople fell for dozens other reasons. But then you have the interpretation. Was this fact important or was it completely unimportant, etc.? But factuality is important because in our era, after Nietzsche has said that everything is interpretation. This has led to a sort of, in postmodernism, we have a sort of flooding of interpretation. And after the fake news or the deep fake, we cannot be just like Nietzsche or Sartre, who are my favorite authors, who said that everything is interpretation, or everything is, let's say, or that freedom is annihilation of reality, like in Sartre, or factuality, or an ecstasy, an ecstatic movement outside factuality. We cannot have this, because this nowadays could lead to an extreme voluntarism of creating fabrications, narratives, etc. So in our era, factuality is something important. But I will come back to this. Unfortunately, we don't have time.
Yeah, I think that the answer pretty much was exhausted, because the process of filling the gaps in our memory, in our perception, was already explained, and I have nothing smart to add to the question. Just one example, for instance, complexity of reality is also important. You can hold a stone, and it's a very factual thing. You hold a stone, but from the Hegelian perspective, you don't know all of you don't know the content. You don't know too much about it, that it's cold and it's hard and it's heavy. And for instance, for me, the shirt that the person behind the camera is wearing is orange. But for the women's eye, women can recognize more colors. It's not just orange, it's also terracotta as well. So there is a different perception of the same thing, right? We have different factual knowledge about things, because that's what more complex. It's already one level more complex. And then for an artist, that would be cyan 126 and magenta 54, and I don't know, somebody can even define it through the three basic colors, which is another level of complexity of things. And it's the same thing, right? So basically, yes, that's why we don't have universal truths. We know different categories. The depth of the categories is not the same, It's very hard to come to universal truth where people have not just different perceptions, but different predispositions to create perceptions.
And is what you said about the women being able to recognize more colors a factual truth or an interpretation?
So social behaviorism says it's a factual truth. The social science says it's factual truth. I have to believe social behaviorism to a certain level, but I don't know.
This gets into another debate with my wife, which is laughing here because of certain reasons. So yes, thank you for contributing in a parallel debate. Yeah.
So you had zero idea what terracotta is, I guess.
Because I agree that it is orange, but I'm afraid to ask her what it is. Yeah? All right. Do we have some question more, or we can close this discussion? We have one more question? I don't see the hand. Just two more. One question per user. It's okay? It's okay? Okay.
My question about the fake news is kind of your opinion. How was possible to some guys? I think it's probably part of mythical anecdote that some guys from Veles made some fake news and some online content, which made possible Trump became president for his first mandate. And your opinion, how was that possible?
I don't see why not, honestly. There was a documentary about these people that witnessed that they did it. They didn't even hide. You can find them by name and last name. They've just found a good scheme to earn money. They didn't care who they worked for. There was nothing ideological about working for Trump. It was pure business for them. As young people, they wanted a chance, and creating fake news will probably now be replaced by AI. You don't need people from Veles to do that. You just have AI, and you can just create anything you want, basically. You can create a parallel truth, but this was pretty much factual. These people existed. And yes, it had a big impact in the Trump's first mandate, gaining Trump's first mandate, for some reason, They thought of it first. If the Democrats thought of it first, they might have used it. This way, it was Trump who thought of it first and gained an advantage in this regard.
Just a micro question here for the finish.
I am sorry to ask two questions, but just really quickly, I was reminded, thank you. I was reminded, Professor Dionysios Skridlos, you said that judges ascertain truth whether someone does evil or not, and Christians overcome that, ascertain factuality, sorry, and Christians overcome that through repentance in truth. But you also mentioned that scientists ascertain factuality as well. Do Christians also overcome the factuality ascertained by scientists?
Thank you very much for your question and also for the previous question. This is why I said that there is one Christian stance to underestimate science, but also journalism, etc. And I go against this stance. It is true that we Christians, we should overcome science, and the sense that science is the positive ascertainment of mortality. And if someone believes in the resurrection, he or she should overcome science. At the same time, what I propose is that one should not underestimate science, because if one underestimates science, you arrive in a, as you have described, all Christians would be, let's say, promoters of fake news, fake narratives, also about science. This is a huge problem. So my answer to that was that when the Christ was crucified, he did ascertain the violence of the world and the mortality of the world. He did not hide it. So the saints are not knowing only what is good, they also know what is evil. But I would just like to make one comment, one philosophical comment to our postmodern era, responding also to the previous question. We live in an era where the following happens. Through cameras and through other means, we have an almost absolute privilege, which was never the case in the previous periods of humanity, to ascertain facts. For example, right now, it is very, very difficult to commit a murder without being arrested in the long term, because there are cameras everywhere. Also, when you're in the internet, you are monitored all the time. We are monitored all the time. So we have this paradox that we live in an era where factuality is monitored all the time. So this could be an era of complete factuality, of a victory of factuality. At the same time, we are in an era where we are flooded by interpretations and narratives, and then we have the other problem of the deep fake, which is intentional. What happens the following in our era, as it is very succinctly put, postmodern totalitarianism, the contemporary totalitarianism, is not about cutting information, cutting the road to information. It is about letting all the information about facts exist and then flooding the social sphere with interpretations. And what the mainstream media do, the established good mainstream media, they do not have the facts wrong, they do write the right facts, but then they flood you with interpretations about that. This is also done by people who are not mainstream, but who are, let's say, alternative, who might do the same. So the postmodern era is about flooding the social sphere with interpretations. That's why factuality is important. Now we have the very contemporary evolution of the deep fake. This can also create false events. But the truth is that those in power, those who can monitor, they have access to the truth about factuality. So the fake news, the deep fake through AI is usually intentional. There are means to to know if something is deep AI, deep fake AI or not, but people do not have this possibility. So what we should do in our postmodern or post-postmodern era is the following. We should ascertain the importance of factuality, and we should give a battle of narratives, creating narratives that are more universal and less narratives of hate and of voluntary fragmentation.
Just for the end, I saw a beautiful commercial today, which is completely based on a true story. I checked it. There is a medical record. It's advertising, and I had no idea what is advertised. And it's about a very obese woman that got shot in the belly. And it was probably obviously a small caliber gun. And the fat from the body stopped the bullet, and she wasn't killed. So the advertising is for donuts. Buy our donuts to avoid death. Thank you.
We have to finish with this example. Like, I think there is not a better ending sentence for finishing the discussion. So thank you so much for the splendid discussion, and kudos to our guests and also to the audience. Thank you for being with us this evening. Tomorrow we continue. You are invited, everybody. Tomorrow we have our second guest who is here among us. This is our respected Sotiriis Mitralексis, our great friend and a great researcher of St. Maximus the Confessor, but a person that is really skilled in different directions with his, I have to mention them, his 4 PhDs, etc. So it sounds like an advertisement, not like this one. This is amazing, but I don't have the creativity to produce such an advertisement. But and we have another great speaker tomorrow that would be with us, Alexander Takovski, who is also, I think, very ready and very passionate about the topic we are going to speak tomorrow about, and it will be the topic Homo Religiosus. So that's everything I would say. So the human nature as religious. Is it not, or how do we interpret this topic and this question from different points of view? So this was a little advertisement on the end for tomorrow. We expect you, and thank you once again for the wonderful evening.